Okay, we're on the air. This study session of the Town Board of Trustees of Estes Park is now in session. Our first item today on August 12th, 2025 is vehicle or motorcycle parking limitations code amendment. I'm going to turn it over to the staff. I have a phone call I have to make before 4:30. I'm going to dash into the police station and make that. I'm somewhat familiar with this since I think I brought this originally to the agenda, and I'll catch up when I get back. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. The item I have for you all is a potential code amendment to address parking limitations for vehicles and motorcycles on private residential property. So the purpose of the study session is to consider amending the Estes Park Development Code to increase or eliminate the permitted number of operational vehicles stored on private property, or consider adding a separate allowance for motorcycles. So our code doesn't have a definition for motorcycle, but the Colorado General Assembly defines it as a motor vehicle that uses handlebars or any other device connected to the front wheel to steer, a seat the rider sits astride, and is designed to travel on no more than 3 wheels. So Section 5.2 B2E6 of the Estes Park Development Code currently permits the parking or storage of up to 4 vehicles on single-family or 2-family lots that are less than 2 acres. This provision excludes vehicles stored within a fully enclosed garage and recreational vehicles. Estes Park appears to be an outlier in its regulation of vehicle parking on private property. Most comparable municipalities do not impose a maximum on licensed and operational vehicles, but they do regulate the storage of inoperable or junk vehicles. So here's a preliminary list of some municipalities that do not have a maximum. At a cursory review, they don't seem to have a separate provision for motorcycle parking. A vehicle is considered a vehicle regardless of how many wheels. Here's what the code language currently looks like. Vehicle storage or parking is treated as an accessory use to the principal residential use. As it says, 4 vehicles on lots less than 2 acres, then it increases incrementally up to 8 total vehicles allowed on lots that are over 10 acres. So today staff is looking for direction from the board on whether or not we should dedicate time and resources toward drafting a code text amendment for vehicle parking. If the board approves this direction, staff will then present a detailed proposal for a code text amendment, including draft regulations that outline specific changes. At this stage, it's a bit early to fully understand the advantages and disadvantages of this potential code update. However, there likely would be some disadvantages of amending the code now outside of the broader development code update. So that's all I have for the presentation. Staff requests guidance from the Town Board of Trustees regarding the allocation of resources for further research into vehicle and or motorcycle parking limitations. If directed to move forward, staff could bring this back as a follow-up study session item for further discussion, or this could begin moving through the formal review process as outlined in Section 3.3. So as with any rezoning applications, code text amendments are evaluated based on the 3 review criteria necessary to address change of condition, compatible with the comp plan and character of Estes Park, and won't affect delivery of adequate services and facilities. So do you all have any questions about this?
Could you bring back that slide that shows the language currently? Just have that up.
So this is out of Section 5.2 of the Development Code. I trimmed off some of the stuff that wasn't really relevant to this, but this explains what it applies to and the limits of how many vehicles per lot size.
Where does this come from? Why are we talking about it today? in all the things that I hear about in conversation, I've never really heard about a problem with the number of vehicles stored. So I'm curious what the origin is, and I know that's coming. Yep, that's my first one.
The mayor can speak to that more directly. He's the one that brought this up for town board
I
consideration.
just looked for him.
I believe, based on our conversations, that the mayor was approached by a constituent living in a neighborhood with smaller lots who was concerned about the town. The constituent had a neighbor call in, made a code complaint. The code enforcement officer went out there, saw that it was a code violation, and started the code enforcement process. This constituent contacted the mayor, indicated their displeasure with this, asked the mayor to ask the board to consider to change the code. Okay,
I've heard a whole lot more about wind signs and other issues that we have not worked up in this fashion, so I thought there would be more behind it. If I own 6 vehicles right now that are licensed and I can drive anytime, anywhere, I would be breaking code by having those vehicles all parked on my property. Is that accurate?
That's technically correct unless they're stored in the garage.
I have other stuff in the garage. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is if they're licensed vehicles, I think it's a stretch for us to limit them. You're asking for feedback. And if they are not licensed vehicles, I think there's a place for us to maybe have some say or on how many vehicles you can store on your property. And it sounds like that would be consistent with other jurisdictions, and that would seem reasonable to me. So that's the feedback from me that you asked for.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was my first question, is where's this coming from? Because I haven't heard it either. And it sounds like it's from someone who got cited.
That's my understanding as well.
Yeah, and, there are probably a lot of things in the development code will be that way. I don't want to get into a habit of every time somebody gets cited, if they don't like it, to come in and change the code, particularly when we're about to go in the development code. I have no problem with changing this. Just not sure this is the way to go about it. I did have a question. What's a fully enclosed structure? Is a carport that, or a loafing shed, or does it have to have a door?
I don't have that definition ready, but I believe it is fully enclosed as a garage, not a carport. It has to have a roof and 3 sides, is my understanding. If it's just simply parked underneath the carport, that wouldn't count as an enclosure.
Okay, three sides and a door?
I believe that's
Or
correct.
just 3 sides and, that's kind of a carport, or a loafing shed would be just 3 sides and a roof. Not sure. Yeah, that was my question.
So I can't recall what year this changed, but I do remember it impacted me and my family quite heavily with 8 children and only a 2-car garage. We had 10 vehicles, and I wasn't quite sure how we could have a home in Estes Park with 8 kids and cars. So I'm curious, though, because it had to have been years ago. Do you know how many complaints we've had? I would be interested to know that, because this is, I've sat on the board now, this is my 2nd term, and we haven't had any complaints. So I too think maybe this is just a one-off. So before I say, well, let's not, look at it, I would like to know if we do have some issues with it, but I don't think it's something super high on the poll right now. But I would be interested to know what kind of feedback we're getting.
So I haven't heard of any complaints about this from at the planning counter. Maybe the opposite. Some people have concerns about too many vehicles being parked. That it's more about concerns about occupancy, that sort of thing. But I have not heard of any comments or complaints about not being able to park enough vehicles.
Yeah, okay.
To my knowledge, the original comment that I got from a citizen was the only comment that I heard that precipitated this discussion. So I've had one.
Yeah, I, along with Mark, think that there's more things that are being brought to our attention a little bit more important than this. So I would say I'm not interested in pursuing this at this time.
Yeah, likewise, I'd rather have it kind of folded into the development code conversation versus us making a change as we're going through some of these. And I understand why we're addressing that with some of the other topics that have been presented before us, but yeah, I think it's interesting too, like for the community would probably need to be thinking about what kind of, it's the balance as we talk about regularly of property rights versus, neighborhood upkeep and what you want. I live in a neighborhood without an HOA, and having an unlimited number of cars parked all over someone's property is not ideal for me personally, but I'm interested in where the community would lie. So I agree. I'm not interested in pursuing it at this time.
I concur. I do have a question, though. It excludes recreational vehicles, so I presume we have some other restriction on recreational vehicles, and what is that?
That's correct. It's a separate provision for that. I believe it's 2 recreational vehicles, and they must be licensed and owned by a resident of the property.
Okay, so they could have, in theory, 4 cars and 2 recreational vehicles?
That's my understanding.
That seems like a lot. The other question is, and this will have direct relevance to Frank and me in particular, what's the difference between a motorcycle and a e-bike?
That's kind of a new one. I don't know if that's been broken down. Yeah, I just have that definition of what a
That's
motorcycle
probably,
is.
neither here nor there.
E-bikes are defined separately from motorcycles
They
in
are.
our municipal code, so we would likely look to that code for regulations relative to e-bikes. I would not anticipate that an e-bike, as classified in our municipal code, would fall under the regulations of this specific section, nor would a regular bike for that matter.
I'm guessing people store those inside.
Yeah, those are normally stored inside anyway. Okay, I just concur that we should do this as part of the review of the development code altogether.
Yeah, I think another thing with the e-bikes, I'm sure there's definition because they don't have to be licensed. So they are by definition unlicensed vehicles, so they'd be stuck. The one thing I would say is, I'm sure somewhere you've got a parking lot, no pun intended, but for things that need to be talked about in the development code, let's make sure this is on there. Because it's worth considering. I don't think it's worth considering as a one-off from everything else, but it's worth considering as we do the development code.
Mayor and Board, to Trustee Eigel's point, the code does already prohibit unlicensed vehicles on most private property unless they're in a fully enclosed garage. So that is written into the code already.
Sorry I missed the beginning of the discussion.
For
because I've heard-
clarity, Attorney, so you cannot park a vehicle that is not currently licensed on your property?
Trustee Eigel, I'm looking at 8.04090, and that is how I read it. It says, "It shall be unlawful for the owner or any person having control over any inoperable vehicle to allow such vehicle to remain within the limits of the town, except in areas specifically zoned for the storage, maintenance, or repair of such vehicles." And then subsection B goes on to say that if it lacks a valid state license plate, or is incapable of moving under its own power, or does not comply with the minimum safety requirements of state motor vehicle laws, then it is considered an inoperable vehicle.
Do you have a date on that ordinance? Is that easy?
1997.
Okay. Yeah, I'd put that in the parking lot also, because either we have to enforce that or not enforce that, because that is currently not the way things are run, but thank you for all the information.
I don't know how it was presented at the start, but the original, when I heard the comment about unlimited vehicles, that was not at all. Have I missed something that increased the scope of what I thought was going to be here, which was talking about what's the limit on cars, 4 cars? Yeah.
That's correct.
My understanding was what we were going to see presented was being able to have then 1 2-wheeled motorcycle vehicle parked in addition to the 4 cars, or whatever that limit of cars is, not unlimited vehicles. Are we off in different directions here? I mean, the answer might still be the same from all the trustees who've made their voice known.
It seems like, isn't the question whether a motorcycle counts as one of these vehicles, or should it be counted separately? Yeah, that was my sense of And is it subject to this restriction? And I think we are thinking because of the code enforcement officer that is subject to this.
That's the
Yeah,
interpretation.
I think we're on the same.
Yeah, that you have a certain number of cars that are allowed, but you could also have one motorcycle in addition to that.
The discussion too was how neighboring municipalities, that they don't have a limit or don't limit it the
Oh.
way that we do. And so I think that's where some of that
Okay,
discussion
all
came.
right.
But the general consensus is making a specific change at this time. If I'm representing the board well, wasn't
That's
our
good.
direction.
Okay. And I think it's pretty much gone up and down the road here. Okay. Well, then you probably have the direction you need for this.
Okay.
Anything else on that one, Town Administrator? Okay. We're listed
thank you.
as break for dinner, and then we get into what'll probably be a very short topic, the Development Code update. Do we want to break for dinner at this point, or do we want to give it a
Mayor-
start and then take a break?
Mayor, we would like to go ahead and move forward with the next item, and then we'll have to take a break in between
Okay,
because the dinner is
yeah.
not here yet.
let's use our time effectively. So, is that Director Caressia? Or? Thought you were going to draw straws there.
No, I was like, come on, Kara. Mayor, trustees, we are getting the consultants. They are in the lobby. So I will just do a quick introduction while we wait. Tonight's study session is two parts, an update, where we've been, what we've been doing. The second part, probably the more significant part, is seeking trustee feedback on some of the questions that have been posed to the community through the survey and open house. We'd also like to get trustee feedback on those items as well. So my part in all of this is really just to introduce our two consultants. It'll be Eric Krongold, who's been before you a couple of times already, along with Philip Supino. He's also working with Eric. He's a code writing specialist. So those two gentlemen will probably both be up here presenting the update and then presenting those questions to the trustees. So with that, I assume here they are. So I'll turn it over to them.
Welcome. We may at some point during the presentation break for the planned dinner that will come in, and we wanted to let you get the head start before that happens.
No problem at all. Can everybody hear me okay? Do I have to?
Oh, yeah, use your Shakespearean
Okay,
voice.
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Krungold, Senior Associate with Design Workshop and the Project Manager for this code update process. I'm joined today by Philip Supino, who's our co-consultant with Headwaters Community Planning. So today we have a series of discussion topics and questions for the board that around the development code that we're really hoping to get your input on. One of the things I want to preface today's discussion with is that nothing in the code, no direction, nothing has been decided yet. We're still really in a listening phase of work. So today's discussion is really hypothetical. We're looking to get some general direction from this group, have an informed conversation, and really looking to weave this feedback with some of what we're hearing from the community and we'll integrate that once we get into the actual code amendments in a couple months. So just a quick agenda for today. We'll quickly go through a project update, spend the majority of our time together around the code update priority areas, and then wrap up with next steps. So in terms of where we are in the process, we're a little under a third of the way through. We kicked off back in February. We really spent a good portion of the spring and early summer around actually reading through the code and identifying areas that we feel there could be improvements on, could be streamlining, there could be some modernization. and better integration with outside direction from outside entities such as CPAW or the Estes Valley Fire Protection District. We wrapped that up in July and issued a final memo to staff. And really where we've been since about July, late June, is in a pause to listen to the community. So I'll walk through a little bit of what we've done here in a second. But we're taking this break really through September just to get some feedback on things, and then we'll pick our pens and pencils back up and resume the code writing process in late September, and that will really run through the end of next year. We're still hoping to have a completed and adopted code before December of next year, and are thus far on track to do that. So did want to just give the board an update on where we are with community.
I've got a question, because I've read your memo twice. It's very extensive, as you well know. And I'm curious about the process of how it's actually getting written. Obviously, a board like ours is not going to write it. We'll make policy decisions about it. Do you guys propose a first draft and run it by staff? Does staff do that? Do you do it together? How's that work?
Yeah, wonderful question. I appreciate that. We treat it like building a house. We start with the foundation. We go through a code out. We develop an outline for what the code's going to look like. Work that through with staff and planning commission, potentially the board, and then we slowly build on it. We do a 50% draft. I believe we have an 80% draft, a 90% draft, and all the while we're iterating, we're fine-tuning language. But it's not going to be our group showing up in front of the town board with 100% complete code, and it'll be the first time you'll ever see it. It's really an iterative and engaging process. Where we're slowly building on things.
And as our client, the town staff is in a primary role in terms of directing that early work to build that foundation and to extend the home building analogy just a little bit more. If you're building a custom home, you could still assume that some significant percentage of that home is going to be built the same way as the one next to it, because there's some best practices for how we do things, right? You got to frame something with 18-inch framing members in the walls, and you got to design the slab in a certain way, and it's the same with the land use code. And so there's some best practices that we will use to build that foundation, but the customization that's going to be so important to fine-tuning it for your community is going to come through our collaboration with community members through the engagement process, and then working with the town staff.
So will we see these 50% and 80% drafts? I mean, I presume it's all really going to be publicly available for everybody to see the iterations we go through?
Yes, there will be. Yes, there will be. We will share those drafts with you all, and there will likely be additional work sessions where we'll touch on maybe a very specific topic.
Right.
Zoning districts is one I can think of off the top of my head.
For sure.
That we almost always do a work session on with elected officials, just to make sure they're comfortable with either amendments to the zoning map that better align with better align with the future land use map, or if there's changes in permissible uses or uses by special review, those type of things we would almost always.
But the interim drafts will be available publicly for review?
They should be, yes.
Okay, thanks.
So just to want to take a moment to talk through some of the engagement we've been doing and will continue to do. I'll start with our open house. So we had our first community open house on June 25th. It was 5 to 7 p.m. at the Estes Park Museum. We got around 75 participants. We got a pretty big rush at the beginning, and then it tapered off. And our plan is to host another open house. We'll be doing one, I believe we've settled on September 20th. It'll be the same material, and that's intentional. We want to try to get feedback on similar topics, but from different groups. I believe we've identified the middle school as where we'll host this next one, and it'll be 9 to 11 a.m. So trying to choose a different day, a different time, a different location to try and solicit a bit more feedback. We'll also have an additional open house next year once we've got some preliminary ideas and a draft of the code to gain some feedback and inform the public of kind of where we are in the code drafting process. We've also launched an online questionnaire. It's about a 10-minute long questionnaire, and it mirrors a lot of the same questions that were asked during the open house. Again, the intent is to try to get feedback within similar topics from different groups. That's currently active and will be active through the end of September. We've also created a Spanish version of the survey and made it accessible through QR code, via phone, via computer, and made it as accessible as possible for folks. And again, this really focuses on topical areas of the code and mirrors what's been shared during the previous open house. All the while we're doing this, we have a lot of help from the community conversations group. So they've been doing small group dialogue sessions in both June and July, and are planning for large group deliberations later this summer. Their work syncs up really nicely with our work schedule because they will be able to take some of the feedback that they've put together and that they've heard into our code drafts. We're also issuing a press packet, bi-monthly press packet that is used to update the website. This gives, as well as has material that can be rolled out in a variety of different forms. So the way we deliver the press packet is we have material that can be used for a social media update, could be used for a radio spot or a press edit, could be used to just directly the website, and we've been, again, doing that on a bi-monthly basis. We are wrapping up small group focus groups right now. So we've had 4 focus groups, each around one of the primary topics of the comprehensive plan: natural environment, housing, economy, health, and social considerations, and built environment, transportation, and infrastructure. Our final focus group is Thursday, and that's around the built environment topic. We've also been meeting with our technical advisory committee and the planning commission as needed to get feedback on topics and just get general input and direction for our group. What we have coming up is pretty exciting. You'll be seeing a lot more of me around the community in August, late August, and September. So we have planned to do 8 pop-up activities. We'll be up here for two-day stretches. I believe we've identified late August and early September, but this is really an opportunity for us to go where the community is. So places like Trailheads and the grocery store and the library, and we're working with staff to determine the exact locations, but we've developed a consolidated version of the boards that were shared at the open house where we could try to grab folks, on their way to do something and get some quick input on select topics and also help to direct them to the survey. So we'll be moving around town for a couple days in August and September. And then during those times, we're working to sync those up with community events. So I believe on the 26th, I'll be at the back to school function. We'll have some boards there and tables, looking to grab families as they're participating in the event. I'll be meeting with the Rotary Club one morning. And again, working with staff to finalize exactly what those groups are. But as I mentioned to Steve, my goal is to be the talk of the town for a couple days in both August and September. So that's where we are on community engagement. Any questions, concerns before we move into the next area of discussion?
No concerns, but I like the wide variety of opportunities and focus groups as the board later gets into discussion about having ad hoc focus groups and things for different other topics. We can probably learn a little bit from how you have assembled those. So I'm a little curious how those things were assembled, but we don't want to cover that here. I'll find that out on the side. Thanks.
Great. So in your memo, there's a number of different priority areas identified for the code update. To talk through these would take a day, probably. And we know there's a lot to get through. So we're hoping to focus today's conversation around a couple key topics. And a couple key questions within those topics specifically. So the way that we've organized this presentation is we'll provide some direction of what the comprehensive plan says around that particular topic, provide some reasoning for kind of why we feel this code update could be a possibility, and then pose a question and really open it up to discussion with the board. We're happy to provide additional information if it's available, and really keep it conversational. We've got a number of topics to get through, so we'll do our best to get through everything, but if we come up against time, please do let us know, and we'll look to wrap things up as quickly as possible. So for today's discussion, we'll really be focused on development. We'll be focused on the topics of development review and regulations, housing, wildlife and habitat protection, wildfire, transportation and parking, signage, mixed-use zoning, non-conforming criteria, and bulking, massing, and design requirements. Yeah, just light stuff.
Town clerk, what's the optimal time for us to let everybody grab dinner if it's here? Do we do that now? That's what we had scheduled originally, or do we roll for a bit? You guys need your dinner now? A little early. Let's roll for a bit.
Okay. Well, just let us know and we can pause whenever. Okay, so first topic, development review regulations and processes. So right now, a number of different processes within the code, minor subdivisions, special review permits, development plan review, they have a set process that they go through. Nearly all of them require some type of a planning commission action or a board of trustees review. Our hope is to simplify this process. And for certain select items, things like a final subdivision plat, a development plan, a location and extent review, have it be an administrative action where staff reviews the application for compliance and can issue a direction on if that particular item is approved or denied. There are, of course, select items that would proceed to either the Planning Commission or the Board of Trustees for review. But really, our hope in this was trying to find the low-hanging fruit, the things that were relatively straightforward to review, and take that burden off of elected officials and appointed officials, just to try to both speed up the development review or speed up that process, but also clear room in what we know are typically very busy agendas for approvals. Did I miss anything there, Philip?
Just that, in general, when it comes to development review practice and process in land use codes, there's a right balance that each community seeks to find for itself between process efficiency and regulatory oversight. And we're trying to strike that balance, and getting your direction on this topic this evening is a really important step in our finding where the right balance is for Estes Park. I think Eric did a good job of describing some of the benefits of adding administrative reviews to a development code. And the counterbalance to that is ensuring that there is proper regulatory oversight, proper opportunities or adequate opportunities for community members to participate in development review conversations to the extent that that's the right approach for the community. So that's the kind of the feedback that we're looking for this evening.
So, question for this group is, do you support changing the development review process for certain items from either Planning Commission or Board of Trustees to review to a more administrative review?
This is a terrible answer, but it depends. I was thinking about this and what we've done in the past, and it kind of depends on what you're going to pull out of it, because I'm certain there are some things that should be pulled out of it. Anything minor, really shouldn't be going to the town board or probably even the Planning Commission. But I think one of the things, if I understand your slide, if you can go back to the prior slide that you passed over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I gather these are ones you propose to send to staff rather than to the decision-making bodies, right?
I do want to clarify we had made a change to this slide
Okay.
and submitted it before it was included in your packet. So just to clarify, the topics that we are recommending for being included in the administrative review are not what's shown here.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I want to just.
So the one thought I had is that the development plan in particular, I think we probably want to retain authority over. It's kind of the whole big picture part of the whole process. And I would be reluctant to say that we should allocate all of that to staff. The staff will make a recommendation one way or the other anyway, based on what the code says and how that is applied. But that seems like kind of a key element to me in all of these projects, that we've got to understand the development plan to understand how it affects all these other issues that we consider in connection with it, because it interacts with it so much. So that would be my one comment, that I really think we need to retain the authority on that.
I agree, it kind of depends on it, the devil's in the details, but things like the final subdivision amendments, final plan amendments, kind of depends on the scope of the amendment. You know, if they're minor amendments, they're just tweaking little things, that makes sense, not to have to wait 2 weeks to get it through us. But if it's some major overhaul or major change at the last minute, so I don't know, there's such a thing as, or you can define minor final subdivision amendments, things like that. There's a line there for me somewhere, I'm not sure where it is, but that's why we hired you.
That's right, and in development codes, there's always standards that are available to staff to apply to a specific application or a specific step in an application, where staff can determine whether it's a minor or a major. And so getting those standards right is going to be our way of responding to your feedback about it depends, because that's totally understand that answer.
Yeah, totally agreed with what these guys said. And I think because of the nuances that can come with, like, you know, not just the time and the energy, but the standards that everyone as the community needs to understand when things like this come before, like keeping those consistent across the board so that staff can, you know, check those boxes and bring them to us. I think that's really, it would be so helpful, because I think we have gotten ourselves into really lengthy, convoluted discussions up here when we get to the point of these big projects, and there's, you know, it's just having some of that standardized feels really, really compelling to me. At the same time, I do want to make sure that, you know, sometimes the decisions for these bigger, hot button items, it's good to have them come before our board and make sure, you know, that our staff that are just doing their jobs, that they can kind of stay out of the boiling water, you know what I mean? And that we can have that, and the alignment, as Bill said, with the, you know, the bigger picture that we're charged with viewing. So I think there's benefits to both, and I think the balance, that's probably a word I'm going to say like 1,000 times tonight, but that balance between letting progress happen, and that doesn't always mean growth or development, just progress happen, and also allowing, you know, the elected officials to make some of these bigger ticket decisions is, I think that's where I would land.
So Mayor, and to Trustee Hazelton's point there, one thing I've seen in development codes, and I wonder if this has been considered or maybe considered later, is when certain items are transferred to administrative review, the planning director, the community development director, retains the authority to elevate it to the planning commission or to the board of trustees if it's a big enough issue. So that, to me, would be an option to address that kind of a concern. One thing that was not on the list, but I'm curious about, is final plats, just final plats in general. Preliminary plats, as I've seen in other communities, come to the board regardless, because that's where most of the bigger picture decisions are made. But sometimes the final plat is really very nitty gritty and doesn't need to be returned to the board for future action. So just want to throw that one out there too.
That's absolutely a best practice on final plat reviews, something we're considering, something that we'll dialogue with staff about to make sure that we get it right and respond to the trustees' feedback on that.
I'm pretty much in sync with what has been set up here, so I think you have a predominance of the board that's weighed in on that, to have that different layering and opportunity to escalate when chosen.
And thank you. And to just address a comment that Trustee Brown made earlier, this is a great topic of something we'd come back before this group, to get in the weeds on and work through over the next several months. Okay, that was a good warm-up question. We're gonna get in. We're gonna get in.
It's all weeds,
Yeah.
man. It's all
We
weeds.
just wanted to ease you all into something. So for this second topic, housing, we've got a number of different questions in here. First, we wanted to just reiterate some of the clear direction that's stated in the comprehensive plan. And that's really that kind of Estes Park is at a bit of a crossroads with housing. And there's clearly a direction from the comp plan in identifying opportunities for new housing opportunities within the community for folks at different stages of their life, folks at different incomes, and trying to identify ways where possible to potentially diversify certain types of housing in order to meet some of these kind of more lofty goals that are stated in the comprehensive plan. The first topic we really wanted to talk through with you all is this idea of housing typologies. A couple of the things that we identified in going through the code of some opportunities are to try and better align zoning and development regulations to support a wider variety of housing. And I'll talk on this a little bit here in a moment. Also providing opportunities for infill and clustered development. So rather than requiring a minimum lot size of 2 acres, requiring a minimum lot size of maybe half an acre, and that homes are located adjacent to one another to preserve more open space. Exploring expansion for permitted housing types such as ADUs, cottage courts, and through the code, supporting small scale and affordable housing development. On the topic of housing types, communities we often work in, they know what they see. And, we understand there's been some recent housing development that's happened here has been larger multifamily style development. And, that's was before our time, but there is the question, is it sensitive to the context of the community? And is there opportunities for additional housing development that maybe doesn't reach to that kind of full extreme? When we look at housing today in Estes Park, there's really kind of 3 types. Some single-family homes, which really is the dominant housing type. Some larger multifamily development projects, some of which that have recently been completed, and then some small-scale workforce housing. There are a lot of things in between, though. Things like cottage courts, where you have maybe small lot homes on 6,000 square foot lots that are co-located around a communal green space. ADUs that could be used as a way to create new housing opportunities, but also supplement the income for longtime residents. Townhomes, courtyard apartments that are not 4 stories, but 2, and at a much smaller scale. Duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes, instances where you'd have multiple units within the building envelope of what looks like a traditional single-family home, but it's actually subdivided into 2 or 3 units. And we've been sharing these different housing options with the community just to show that it's not 2 extremes. It's not single-family or giant apartment building. There's a lot in between, and we really want to be sensitive to that context within the community, because it's a big jump just to go from a single-family home to a 2-acre apartment building. So we've been sharing these different housing types during our engagement events with the community. We've got, these are part of our survey that we have active right now. This is what we'll continue asking during our pop-up events. But curious for this group, what types of housing do you all feel are missing in Estes Park that would align with some of these goals that are in the comprehensive plan? I can pull this one back up here.
Well, I'll speak first since I'm the Housing Authority liaison. I think all of those types that you have on this slide are things we are very interested in exploring and figuring out how it aligns with the development code and the zoning in particular. It's and this is a question probably for staff, but it's my understanding that planned unit developments are allowed only in commercial zones right now, is that correct? Not in residential? And the history, as I understand it, planned unit developments is they're usually residential. Now, they may be mixed use too, they're often that. And, you know, there's a housing authority property that is a perfect candidate for something like that. 11 acres that was bought off of Marys Lake Road. And so I kind of feel like we need to have the ability to do planned unit developments in residential zones. That's one thing that I think is important. It's there will be some significant pushback from the community about that because there's many that feel that they don't want that sort of discretion put in their elected officials, and they want the zoning rules to be more cut and dried than that permits. But my personal feeling is that we've been hearing a lot recently about the missing middle, about the middle income people and their inability to buy housing up here because of the predominance of the single family house. And some of these other types of opportunities could present opportunities for that missing middle that may be a purchase option, maybe an ability to buy property. There's some preliminary plans going on for the fish hatchery project that was a dramatic change from what the prior developer had put together. He put together a bunch of these just big apartment buildings. The community didn't like that, and particularly with Prospector being built. But and it's understandable. And it also only really addressed one segment of the workforce that needed housing. Those that would be, could probably only afford an apartment type building. But there are other parts of the workforce. And, I feel like it's really important that there be a greater degree of ownership in that missing middle than exists today. Whether we can achieve that or not, who the hell knows? It's a difficult one to hit, very difficult, very expensive to do. But these types of things are the things that I think we need to look at. One other comment, we have been monumentally unsuccessful, in my view, of developing accessory dwelling units. I'm not sure why that is. I think it may be a cost factor or maybe an availability of land. Meanwhile, the state is mandating that we allow accessory dwelling units. And I think we're okay about doing it. It's just that that part of it doesn't seem to be working here. And I'm not sure why that is. And I'd be interested in you guys taking a look at that and evaluating that. So, thank you.
There's one item too that you mentioned it briefly, I think one reference up above, but is the seasonal workforce housing, which is a different model of housing. It might be dormitories or, whatever it is, might fit into some of these categories. But I think for our economy, that's one that we really haven't addressed very well, and it does cause economic strife. And that's a totally different market than somebody who's going to live here, either low income or the middle.
You haven't heard from many yet, but I kind of like when Bill was talking about all of the above in these. I just recently went through one of the development code surveys, and so I'm pretty fresh and familiar with these pictures and these different types. And a lot of them, by the pictures that are showing, look like they would integrate nicely and keep beautiful areas and green areas and still provide something for perhaps that missing middle. It doesn't hit on what Trustee Lancaster was talking about with those temporary and certainly not high-income folk, but that are very important to our summer economy.
I think, a height restriction is a very important thing to keep in mind. And so, your duplex, triplex type look is, I think, always better than your 3-story monstrosity of things. Your courtyard apartments, to me, I think some type of community, not just, houses, but, small parks and things to bring that neighborhood together. And I think that's really important, even more so now in Estes, because we have so many short-term rentals and so many tourists that do come and go. And so you kind of lose that neighborhood feel. Even if you have a neighborhood that isn't inundated with short-term rentals, you still have visitors driving around, trying to find the elk, trying to, maybe find where they're supposed to be or what have you. And I think that we really need to make sure we're making a community feel when we do have, whether it's a small piece of property and we do a cottage apartment type thing, to incorporate that as much as possible. We touched on the ADUs. I'm not certain. Yeah, who knows what the guess is on that. So in my book, just keeping the grandioso out of the picture and not, even though we have very limited land, so obviously that's when you go up because that's cheaper than going and buying more property, which we don't have. So, but there has to be a strike in the middle somewhere. But I would just say we need to concentrate on not forgetting that community feel in those housing areas would be a big thing for me.
Yeah, ditto what Cindy said. She touched on a lot of points I was gonna mention. In particular, if I was compelled to, ADUs, absolutely. Bill's comments there are spot on. But the cottage courts really speak to me because of the ability for people to create that community and, the face-to-face time with neighbors and getting families and not even like families. I think we always think families with kids, but families in terms of, younger couples or, people who are moving here or multi-generational families being able to engage with each other. I have some family that lives in Rain Dance in Windsor, and while I'm not necessarily suggesting that we copy and paste that kind of development up here, it obviously we don't have enough land, nor do I think that's necessarily our style. But it's so interesting to cruise around there and see that there's so many opportunities for people to find housing in there, no matter what their lifestyle looks like. And so you can go to one section and find those cottage court type homes, and then you've got the larger single families, and then you've got some of the apartments, but everything kind of seamlessly flows. And that's compelling to me, to find a way to work that in while being respectful of some of the limitations that we have, in particular with height and the desire for that gathering, like green space gathering too.
To answer your question, I think that we need to take a look at transient seasonal workforce housing. Frank brought it up, and it's something that we currently we house a lot of those folks in hotel rooms, and they'll pack them in 4 to 8 per hotel room. There's a property downtown that has 20 rooms that can hold 80 seasonal workers, and you wouldn't believe where it's at and how small it is. But it's what people have to do. So I think that that's an area that we overlook. We don't accommodate it, and they find a hole to fit in, but we're sure not helping them with that. So I think that's an area we could focus on. ADUs confound me. I don't know why there aren't more opportunities, and I need to make a call to planning tomorrow probably, but I think it's out of sight, out of mind, and people don't think about it as a solution, but it is. We could solve a lot of housing issues by focusing on that as a community.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm not going to repeat everything everybody said. I do think the ADUs, if you look back 30, 40 years ago, that's how people found housing here, was ADUs, without a question. Why that's changed, I actually think, and no offense to the development code or anything else, is that people look at it as being as too many code regulations. I really do. To go through the hoops for an accessory dwelling unit that you're not going to make much money on, it feels like too much work. So I think we have to be careful about making too many laws and too many hoops that people, I know it's what we're dealing with right now, but every time I hear this, it kind of gives me the willies, because the more code regulations we have and the more things that people have hope, they will not do these things that people want. I can look at all these and say all these have their place for sure. But if we find out from the community that people don't want to live in townhouses or can't afford townhouses or don't like fourplexes or whatever, it's a moot point of what I think should be here. So I think it really has to be what the community or the people that are using these developments want. And I think the outreach is good that we're doing that. Like I said, I think me looking at it and going, well, I think ADUs is the way to go. Well, if nobody's building them and nobody's living in them, that doesn't do us any good. So I do think that we have to be careful, especially about ADUs, about not making it so many hoops that people will jump through, they will not do it. It's one thing if you have a developer that's to develop an apartment complex or cottage courts or court. I mean, they're used to those hoops. I don't want to say that because nobody wants to go through hoops, but they're kind of used to going through the hoops. It's not a personal, house homeowner that's saying, oh, I want to put an ADU for people to live in. It seems overwhelming to me to get any kind of approval for that on my property. So I just think most people feel that about ADUs. So I think that is actually the problem with ADUs, is that it's become such an overwhelming issue with people getting approved for stuff that I think almost the time of ADUs is gone because the regulations have just gotten crazy. So those are my thoughts.
Oh, we know that regardless of which of these directions we go with, we're all pretty much in sync on maintaining height restrictions, and you referenced it too, even when we were looking at the townhome. Yeah, it would be within our height restrictions. Embedding the green is so important. I think it was Los Angeles who, moved in that direction 80 or 90 years ago of embedding green as they developed neighborhoods. And we're a far cry from Los Angeles, but we don't want to lose the green. Therefore, we have to maintain and retain. But yeah, that low end and those seasonals, they're part of the engine that keeps this going. So somehow we have to get that folded in. That might be on later slides there.
I didn't mention earlier, and I want to make sure we also have a focus piece, and hopefully you're talking to the senior citizens of this community, because we have a lot, and also your family dynamic is different. We don't have a nursing home anymore, so sometimes they're living with their family. So that's a big concern here. They can't afford their home anymore, or needing to be taken care of at their children's home. So keeping that sector in mind too is very important in my thinking.
Okay, was that enough for you?
That was enough, and I have a couple of just follow-up thoughts, if it's all right. First, on the temporary housing for seasonal workers, I really appreciate that comment, and we will have a discussion item here that looks to potentially address some of the needs with that group. But I just appreciate you all bringing it up. The second piece was around ADUs. Just to offer it, we recently completed a study for Basalt. They were having similar issues where they saw ADUs as a really simple off-ramp to build more housing and couldn't quite understand why no one was doing it. What we found out, it was really threefold. It was the code issues, specifically the need to go in front of both Planning Commission and Town Council to get that ADU approved, regardless of where it was within the community. Two was most of Basalt is some type of restricted covenants community, and the covenants did not allow for any accessory dwelling units, and it would have to be amended. To amend it would require a supermajority of residents. The third piece was cost. We ran some numbers and found that the average ADU, if you built about a 700 square foot ADU, you'd be looking at a $425,000 cost out of pocket to develop. ADUs, because their secondary structures are not eligible for FHA-backed loans, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac-backed loans, you can't do a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage on an ADU. So it's something that residents were having to pay out of pocket for to develop. And most folks don't have that type of liquidity to do that. So what we did for the Basalt is we looked at a couple programs, both grant and then a loan program, a revolving loan program, to try to undercut some of those issues and simplify the code process where an ADU became a staff administrative approval. But you're not alone. I think a lot of communities around are struggling with that.
They must have gotten infected by aspen or something.
Yeah, $500 a square foot is not cheap to build at. So the next topic we're hoping to address with you all is this idea of a community housing overlay. Community housing overlays, I think, are a really interesting tool in communities like this, where you have relatively large zone districts that have homogeneous housing. They don't allow a ton of different types of housing typologies. What a community housing overlay zone does is it looks to capture various portions of different existing zone districts and apply overlap zoning onto it that would allow additional types of housing that wouldn't be allowed under normal circumstances within those underlying zones. What this does is really twofold. First, it removes the need to have to overhaul an entire underlying zoning district and prescribe housing types that may not be appropriate for that entire area. It lets you get a little bit more surgical on where certain types of housing types are allowed. And when we do these, we really look to locate them near the types of amenities that folks may need who are living in that type of housing. Things like transit, trails, parks, open space. So it can be a way for us to expand the types of housing within the community without having to go and change every underlying zoning district, and be a little bit more surgical of where housing could or could not be. And there's a number of different ways this is done. It can be done by changing height requirements, reducing parking requirements, allowing different types of housing. But again, it's a way to be a little bit more prescriptive in housing options. So a question for the board is this something you'd like us to explore and see how it could be applicable to Estes Park to help to implement some of these housing goals?
I'm not sure I'm clear enough on it yet.
I think we were just discussing the economics around ADUs, and I think that's a good lens to look at the overlay district through. Insofar as that third bullet point is describing sort of density, parking, height, various zoning standards that translate into the economics of a development proposal, right? If you can build a taller building, which we're not advocating for, I'm just making an example. If you can build a taller building, to your previous point, you can build more square footage, which means you can lease it out for more money, and your economics are different on your development. The same can be said about setbacks or parking or any of the other standards that are in a zoning code. And overlay districts are used in different communities to achieve different community purposes by changing the economics of a development without changing the underlying zoning. It's kind of like a quid pro quo. The city of Montrose says if you own property in this district and you want to deliver workforce or attainable housing to this community, we will modulate zoning to change the economics of your development. That's kind of at 30,000 feet what an overlay district is attempting to do. And so the question before the board, and we think what the comp plan is driving at, is should the town of Estes Park connect different zoning standards, therefore different economics, to the achievement or the delivery of more workforce and attainable housing in the community? It's kind of sort of a different way to look at it.
The one other thing I'd add is that where this overlay happens is completely up to the town. We can, work within or throughout different zone districts, target certain areas. I think that's the benefit of it, is it can be a little bit bespoke to meet the needs of the community.
And like a planned unit development, it can be something that maybe isn't even prescribed to a specific part of town, but is something that can be asked for by a developer who's willing to meet the town's standards as part of that quid pro quo.
I'm not sure about this one. I mean, it feels a little bit like rezoning, but not having to go through rezoning. It's if it's changing the standards, changing the densities, but keeping the underlying zoning the same, well, then the underlying zoning doesn't mean anything. You're basically rezoning. It seems like kind of a backdoor way to do that. I mean, we do have project-specific bonuses and alignments. I'm more comfortable with those than a whole big area. The other, it feels a little bit like the Stanley Historic District, which is a zoning overlay district we have now, which frankly has been a pain in the butt. It probably helped with the development, but the sooner that goes away, the better. It gets roped into some things that we've been stuck with for 20 years or more. So I don't know. I've got some concerns about this direction. If we want our area to be to zone to something like this, then let's take it to the public, have the public comments, and rezone it. But this kind of rezoning, not rezoning thing, just it doesn't feel good to me.
This is definitely an incentive-focused tool, and it's a tool that's deployed by communities that are really serious about wanting to achieve a specific development outcome somewhere in town. So I understand your point very well.
And I have start to read about some communities in the Front Range looking at this same, and I don't know that much about it. So I too have a little heartburn on having this overlay, and unless I'm interpreting it incorrect, so you kind of change things, and then what do you do down the road? I mean, does that stay there forever? Does that overlay? Does it expire? I wouldn't say I could yes on this or no on this without further really having like a study session on it or something like that. But I have seen this come up, and I was wondering what brought this up, and what inspired, and what could happen to a community that allows that. Because to me, I'm not sure. It's pretty scary in my book. But anyway, I would want to have more information and really a good handle of what overlay would do now and down the road to that particular area that got overlaid.
So I agree with Trustee Lancaster that it is rezoning, and I wouldn't want to create an overlay without going through the rezoning process effectively. I think we would need to do that, and maybe that would be part of it anyway. I do think there's a place for it. So for instance, most single-family districts don't allow duplexes, triplexes, things like that. And, it's one thing to build a huge apartment building in one of those things. It's something totally different to do a duplex or a triplex. And I think there may be a room for it, as long as it's limited in some fashion to be consistent with the area. You might have that in some single-family zones, while you might have a broader overlay of some sort in a different zone that, particularly a commercial zone, that might provide some ability to have some variety in what's there that might be helpful for the community, might be helpful in many respects. So I wouldn't throw it out, but I do think we've got to look at it as if it's a rezoning. And that if we're going to adopt anything like this, we better go through the process as if we're doing a rezoning. So.
Yeah, Bill has some good points there. We're agreeing more and more these days,
know,
Bill. I don't know what's
wrong
going
with
on. I think too, I would lean a lot on what the community feedback on this would be. I imagine we'd have some strong opinions on this. So I don't want to throw it out completely, but I think there are some issues that we might, reach as a community on this one. And I think too, and I want to be careful about how they say this, because we still have a crisis in terms of needing to find adequate housing for our community and the balance in our community. And we've made some significant strides in the past few years in terms of our funding for it. There's interest from either in-house, kind of local developers, but we're not as desperate as I think maybe some other communities are, where they're like, we have to have the ability to attract people to the table. That said, none of us knows what the next couple of years are going to look like economically, right? Or the next decade's going to look like economically. So throwing it out completely might be, as we're doing this huge rewrite, I think could bite us in the butt at, at some point. So I'd like to continue considering it, but I'm not convinced that our community would be supportive of it this time. And by proxy, then it'd be challenging for me to be supportive of it.
I wouldn't be supportive of overlay for zoning unless I understand they use it for, and I was trying to look up the word what I was looking for, but for hazard mitigation. So sometimes for floodplains or fire hazard mitigation zoning, they can use overlay, but that would be really the only way I would be for it myself.
What kind of riots did they have in Montrose? They do this. Yeah, I'm not much of a fan of it. I've heard several say, let's not throw it out completely, but obviously in the shape that we're seeing it right now, it's not real popular.
I have a question. What is mandatory inclusionary zoning? Would you explain that to us?
In certain communities, they require a percentage of a development over a certain size to have a required affordable housing. So if you're going to build 100 units in Montrose, you're within the city limits. I'm just making this up.
Yeah,
If you build 100 units, 20 of those units have to be affordable, and that affordability has to meet some prescribed standard. So it's 60% of AMI or 80% of AMI, and sometimes it's the number of units, sometimes it's a percentage of gross square footage in a development, but you're required, mandatory to include affordable housing in your proposed residential development.
I just have a quick question, maybe Town Administrator Mahalik knows. Did I read something that Larimer County was doing, proposing overlays somewhere in the county? Do you know of?
Director Correcchia might have a better idea if there's planning overlays proposed. I can't recall any.
Huh, because that's who I thought was, that I read somewhere in the valley. And I'm like,
It very
overlay,
well could
what
be,
is that
Trustee
really?
Youngland. It's not ringing
Okay.
a bell with me, but we
Okay.
can look into it and pass it along if we find anything.
I'll dig deeper.
I'd be surprised if it was a density-related
Yeah.
overlay, just given the relatively rural nature of the county.
Yeah, that's what I was surprised. So I thought, well, maybe I didn't quite grab all that overlay means. So, okay.
How are we doing on time for your items that you want to get to today?
We are on item 2 of 8.
Okay, Frank.
Just real briefly, the county has a few things like the LaPorte area planning area, which is an overlay zone for LaPorte because it's unincorporated. And it's kind of got a community feel to it, but it's not incorporated. So they have their own planning advisory board. And I think Red Feather might have one as well. So I know it's been used for years for unincorporated areas that have a sense of community.
Well, they also used it for like the growth management areas where we talk about.
Yeah.
Yep. And okay, everybody knows what we're talking about, but yeah.
So on the subsequent items, we will all say everything we want to say, but we'll do it very concisely and quickly. So, carry on.
This
You run a tight meeting, so.
This is exactly the feedback we wanted, though, so we really appreciate it. And just to quickly clarify, the Montrose example, that's a development overlay district. That's not explicitly affordable housing. It's just a way to illustrate how that district can cross different areas. So I did want to make sure the board was aware for that. So this topic came up a little earlier, but it's something that we were interested in. And that's the creating a pathway within the development code to repurpose select aged lodging properties within the community, allowing conversion of those hotels, motels, seasonal lodging, really to target the need for short-term housing for seasonal workers. And in doing so, you could permit these to be rehabbed to be dormitory-style housing, co-living units where you have like a communal kitchen, and group housing. And really this looks to get at, I think, what Trustee Eigel and Lancaster were mentioning, and that's the group that needs to be here for 3 months but can't secure a lease. And there are, we were doing our tour with staff back in February, we came across there were some old units old lodging units that were pretty aged, and the topic came up. An example of this is over in Summit County. They've invested in the conversion of 2 of their hotels to create some of these rooms for seasonal staff who are working at the resorts.
And just to identify some of maybe the regulatory trade-offs that would go along with this conversation, the building code has certain standards for unit size, right? So what constitutes a dwelling unit? These conversions might bump up against that. The land use code, the developments code is often going to have standards around units per acre that this might bump up against. Fire code has standards for separation between demised dwelling units, which this might not conform with. There are solutions to all those things. And so if there's an underlying policy objective that the community seeks to solve, like we want seasonal housing for our workers, then there are code responses to all that. But I just wanted to identify some of the regulatory trade-offs that were kind of underlying the conversation.
And just to make a point, I would be, oh, go ahead, sorry. No, go ahead, Travis.
It's not a planning concept, but we have seen this happen a number of times over the past few years in Estes Park, and there is a financial policy component to this, because when we see those conversions, it is not an insignificant financial impact to the town's general revenue. So not that that should prevent us from exploring this or considering this, but we should take into account that there are elements of the financial policy at play as well whenever we're making a conversion from a short-term accommodation unit that's been built as a short-term accommodation unit into longer-term accommodations just based on taxing structure in Colorado.
I don't like that answer, but because I'm 100% for these conversions and to make it easier for people to convert and not be so stuck on regulations, not taking away from safety, but not making it so bad that people can't do it, even private parties.
I'll get mine in quickly. Yes.
So as you probably know, we've done this. Now, I didn't think of some of the regulatory hurdles you just mentioned. I'm not sure how we got by those, but we converted a 90-unit vacation rental place into workforce housing. And, the main problem there is when you build rental units, you don't build in any storage to speak of, and that's been the major problem there. But be that as it may, I do think the Housing Authority has discovered that that is a very effective way to provide workforce housing relatively quickly, because they've done 3 of them in the last year or two. Fall River Village, Beaverbrook, and there's another one over by Antonio's. Anyway, that are smaller. Those 2 are smaller, and it's a really effective way of getting workforce housing online quickly, and they're usually, well, they're typically they're going to be in accommodation zones in the first place, so a lot of the opposition that you have to development doesn't really come into play as much with those. So it is a very, very positive thing. But having said that, there are clearly some places that I know the Housing Authority has looked at things where they just say it's really not appropriate. Now, they've been thinking more in terms of the permanent resident thing, and it's really a tougher thing for permanent residents than it would be for seasonal. So it fits probably better with seasonal than it does permanent residents, but it's something we almost have to look at because of the absence of developable property here too, and the costs of doing it. And it would be, I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle for us.
That was yes, right?
Yes, yeah, I would strongly support it, and I would support it for that transient seasonal housing, not for long-term housing, not for a year or 2-year lease. So supporting the conversion and the addition or the development of that property that's already been used that way to accommodate this type of use. I think there's a serious need for that in our community. I'm behind it, but not just limiting it to the building that's there, but any other new ideas to take care of this problem?
Mark said it well. I agree the same thing, certainly for the transients. And it has been done anyway. The other ones are the Holiday Inn did it with that unit to the south of them for their employees. And the Y just, last year bought Glacier Creek or Glacier Lodge out on 66, which I think is in the county, isn't it? It's not ours. But they bought a whole lodge property for their own seasonal housing, so it's a lot cheaper way to build it than building from scratch. And it might be great opportunities for some lodge owners who want to get out of the business or do something else with it as well. So, yes.
Yes.
Thank you all. Mayor Hall, do you all need to take a break for food or are
You
you to
folks
continue?
ready for your food? Yes. We will take a brief pause. We'll suspend the session for 15 minutes. If that.
Because that way Kirby can go through the details because it is part. She gets more details than I do. Kirby, you know what I forgot on my counter today?
What?
I had a question for you. It's big, it's about that big.
What?
Yeah.
Really? What was it?
It's a chicken egg, but it's literally that big.
Do you notice that I'm going to get eggs from you all the time?
Yeah, that's why I was thinking.
Why is it so tiny?
It's probably a young chicken's first egg. It probably doesn't have a yolk, but it could have yolk. It's like literally that big. So I saved it just for you.
Yeah, we know.
It's a thought that counts.
Some of them are like that big, right? But this one is like literally like smaller than that.
You have the best eggs, man. Jordan's sister Kylie, she has chickens too. She just brought us some, and her eggs are big too. It's like I love just being down here, just love staying and getting them. It's so nice. Although they've been
I've got my
selling.
people.
Oh, I've been down there a couple times, and I'm like,
I know, I tried to get them in there, and all of a sudden my staff was like, oh wow. Somebody told me like when I was home, you know?
before I came out here, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, half of them now they started putting later.
Do you want the containers?
Only because they're hard to get. They can only use ones that don't have, like, somebody bring me stuff.
We have some
Okay, we'll get them.
brought back. I just left it by the.
Okay, somebody bring me other egg, and I can't do that because.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, can't use like Safeway egg thing, I'm saying I have Safeway egg.
Yeah.
So, but, yeah, I have a good friend of mine who does.
We asked them to make you a different meal tonight. I'm sure you don't want it now, so you want me to leave it over there?
Well, I'll take a look, see what they
Okay.
have.
Yeah, they'll be fresh.
I'm glad you didn't know that. I said it looks like you're right from the same page.
Right for the same.
You're right from the beginning. All of them have the same thing.
I did have a little rooster day. I didn't. I reasoned for day, but,
I'm just.
likes to say, I find something that works and stick with it.
I guess we're all here. If IT is ready, we can resume. People can finish their meals appropriately while we're going on. Are we on the air then? It looks like we're on the air. So we're back in session.
Okay, thank you. So our next topic we'd like to discuss with you all is around wildlife and habitat protection. This was brought up earlier in the context that we're gonna propose to you all. So similar to housing, the comprehensive plan has a lot of really excellent direction around how we should and how the town should work to approach wildlife. Acknowledging that the location of Estes Park is a gateway to a significant natural resource and just its embedded location in the environment. So we've identified a couple options around wildlife and habitat protection. And it really looks to merge some of the mapping work that we're doing, but also that CPAW is doing around critical habitat and wildlife migration corridors. One of the things that we are looking into and are interested in potentially pursuing for the code is a natural resources protection overlay. This would be an overlay area for select portions of the community that were directly next to or within some of these critical habitat areas. So what exactly is an overlay? The overlay is intended to protect critical resources by managing where, how, and kind of how development can occur. We would look at things like wildlife habitats, again, migration corridors, steep slopes, areas that are wetland or riparian zones, and specific regulations within that natural resources protection overlay may deal with fence height, for example, limiting fence height to allow migrating elk to move through a space, restrictions on building placement, so keeping buildings spaced a certain way to allow migrating animals to move through that space, grading and drainage controls to protect water quality or slope, and minimum buffer areas from natural resources, particularly riparian habitats. So there would be some type of slight design regulations that were put on structures within these areas. So a question for the board. Do you support the creation or us looking into this protection overlay as a way to guide the development in some environmentally sensitive areas within the community?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
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 Great.
Before we go, I have a little heartburn about this because I have learned that everyone thinks they're in a wildlife corridor in this community because really we all are. There's so many elk here. It seems to me that this is more of a complete community issue than it is an overlay. That we have an interest in doing this throughout the community and not just in certain areas. So I don't know. And the other thing is with climate change, some of these things are changing. And like 6 or 7 years ago, we didn't have any moose here. But the fire over on the other side of the divide drove moose over to our side of the divide. And so now we have moose to deal with that we didn't previously have. And the moose affects other things like it affects particularly the beaver because they eat all the vegetation that the beaver make dams out of. So it's an ever-changing thing too. And I don't know, it feels to me like it's more of a community-wide issue than an overlay.
I do think that any development that needs to weigh wildlife, just the nature, and other resources, not just wildlife, the trees, everything, wetlands, everything. But I think the way this is defined, we would still determine which areas that overlay lands on.
Yeah, like wetlands, I guess I saw this. Wetlands, are different because there's clearly are some specific areas for wetlands. But wildlife, it's just everywhere here. The main street here could be a wildlife overlay zone easily. We have elk jams all the time. So I don't know, that's my feeling about it.
There's a community in the province of Alberta in Canada. I forget the name of the town. It's called the Bow River Valley. It's a region in the Canadian Rockies. And about 15 years ago, they put in place exactly what you were describing, which is a comprehensive community program for managing wildlife. And the development code in those communities is just one tool in the toolbox for that community to achieve its sort of natural resource protection goals. And we hear you loud and clear that it's a sort of community-wide issue. And in the context of the development code, what we're suggesting is that this would be a really good first step towards perhaps a sort of larger community conversation about how we respond to some of those topics.
And in terms of creating a nexus between where this overlay happened or the boundaries of it, we would look for guidance from, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, some of the resource mapping that they've done. So there'd be some basis for it, but of course, we completely understand some of the, your thoughts, Trustee Brown. I think we could probably skip this one. All right, wildfire. Switch.
Wildfire is one of the handful of topics that we've heard most clearly from community members, from the Planning Commission, from staff. And I think there's also the most energy already in the community around responding to this topic. And so the comprehensive plan, like, made some very clear statements about the community's desire to mitigate and avoid wildfire risk for your residents, for structures in your community. The four elements, or the four policy statements in the comprehensive plan, provide us with really clear direction on which way the community would like to go there. And so some of the specific responses that we are looking at include aligning the code with state-level wildfire mitigation standards. The state passed the Colorado Wildfire Resilience Code just this year, and all of our conversations with the Estes Valley Fire Protection District have centered, at least in part, around making sure that our code update, your code update, aligns very closely with the Fire Protection District and the state's movements with respect to complying with the new state standards. Planning for natural hazard areas by integrating land use code decisions into some of those broader wildfire hazard identification and mitigation efforts regionally. Having standards for wildfire mitigation in new and existing development. I think this is going to be a sort of key threshold topic that we want to unpack a little bit with you tonight, is that distinction between new and existing development and who has to comply with wildfire protection standards and in what way. And then incorporating landscaping best practices into the development code in a little bit more of an explicit way than they're included now, to support, again, those larger regional and state efforts around wildfire protection and mitigation. And so the big picture question before you is, should wildfire mitigation regulations be applied to both new development and existing development? And then if so, what would potentially those review criteria look like for existing development in terms of the level of compliance that they have to meet in order to improve the community's wildfire resilience as a whole?
If I could just, if I could offer one example. If someone, for instance, were coming in for a remodel of their home, and they were demolishing what equated to 51% of the building, would they be required then to bring the entire structure into compliance with the code? Or is a minor remodel below a certain threshold not required to comply with what's directed in the code?
Like the conversation about ADUs, I think we have to be cautious about over-regulating the residents and about telling them what to do, and we have to be careful about how many rules we throw down on our community. And I think this is an area where we can really get into that. When you talked about landscaping, you talked about, do we hit the 51%? So what I hear is a property owner is technicality. Now I have to follow this whole new set of rules. So I want to be cautious about that. Also, the cooperation with the fire district, I think, is going to be critical here. We had a presentation recently from the fire district about whether the town would be interested in taking over the enforcement and the code that's being adopted by the state, or has been adopted by the state, because the fire district has some responsibility in that. They have opportunity in that, I think. They also have funding, they have resources, and so if the desire is for our code to be the hand that regulates this, I think we have to explore that more with the fire district and determine whose responsibility it is. It is important for our community. It's an opportunity for us to have a safer place to live, but not over-regulate it, because the government can't tell everyone what to do to be safer, in our opinion. So I would be cautious about how deep we go into this area.
To the point about sort of span of control or authority with respect to the fire district and the town. We're not operating with direction to fundamentally change the role of the development code in terms of fire code enforcement.
Okay.
That's not direction that we've been given. That's not in the comprehensive
good,
plan.
good, yep.
That's not how the development code is structured now.
Good.
So that would be a departure, I think, from the mandate that we've gotten from you all.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Mark. We can have too many rules and regs. So to find a happy medium to, I think, work with the fire department and see what, where the state falls. I don't like the government telling the landowners, that they can't do this and they can't do that all the time. So I'd just be cautious of that.
I think there's another consideration, and that's insurance. The insurance rating is done by a community as a whole, and I think maybe looking into how this could affect our ability for our area to be maybe lowered down in the risk factors, because I hear from people, unfortunately, one of them was my insurance person, how much property insurance is going up, and I don't see it changing when you look at the fires now. And that's an issue of community-wide interest. I mean, I understand that there are private property rights of not telling you what to do, but the minute what you do on your property makes my fire insurance go up by 150%, now your rights are trampling on my rights. So I think looking into that, and I do think if we shown that we were aggressive to an appropriate level, in just like we do with fire and the tree cable, in doing mitigation work before these hit, it could really benefit people in a number of ways when it comes to insurance.
I'm curious, I have a question for you guys about what kind of review criteria or thresholds. You mentioned 51% or percentage of a redevelopment or something like that. Are there other ones like only exterior or second level, or I don't know, what kind of ones do you typically see?
You can slice and dice it a lot of different ways. If you're going to there's some communities, if you touch the roof or the siding of the house, then you have to replace all of it with the appropriate fire-resistant material. There are some communities, if you disturb, to Eric's point, a certain amount of the gross square footage, the entire house has to be resided, reskinned with fire-resistant materials. If you're going to put on a deck or expand a deck beyond a certain size, then it has to be built with fire-resistant materials. There's a lot of different ways that communities choose to do that.
Thank you for that. And do you see that changes based on community areas and zones? So we've got a big mitigation project happening on the west side over by the Y. Is that a zone that you could, that's probably too specific geographically, commercial or accommodations or whatever, they're held to a different standard on that than single-family residential that's held differently from seasonal? Is that something, does it get that nuanced?
Broadly speaking, the existing building code, it can be targeted at specific building types. It can be targeted at specific use types or zone districts. So we can write it however the community needs us to, and find a way to make sure we're complying with state law. And
Well, the first question, as I hear the discussion on this, we're answering it broadly, but not specifically as it's asked. I tend to think that mitigation regulations, whatever we determine they need to be, should certainly be on new developments. I mean, if the caution that we're raising on too many regulations is relating to existing properties, I'm okay with that. But then the second question, regardless of how you answer the first, do we support the introduction of review criteria or thresholds for different development activities? Well, I do. I think we ought to have that, even if we're only talking about new developments.
thank you very much. Any other trustee comments on the wildfire question? We've also had some very good discussions with community members and technical advisory committee group members around commercial design guidelines. The comprehensive plan had several statements in it that connected the health of the tourist economy, the community character sort of topic, the community's perception of itself as a gateway community, but also as a year-round lived-in community, and the aesthetics of downtown. And so in response to some of those comprehensive plan policies and the comments that we've gotten from everybody we've spoken with, we've identified some specific targeted opportunities to better support the look and feel of the business district and support the community character while ensuring that we sort of mitigate the potential future where more corporate architecture gets introduced to town. I don't know how many gateway communities you've visited, but there's definitely been an increase in sort of corporate business operation interest in gateway communities. That corporate architecture can sometimes look and feel very different than the more historic parts of a town. So some of the ideas specifically are codifying clear expectations for development that sort of transitions in scale and form to make sure that one neighborhood speaks sensitively to another, one development speaks sensitively to another. Design guidelines for commercial and multifamily developments, again, to make sure that new development in town supports the character that everybody enjoys, whether they be visitors or year-round residents. And then clarifying definitions and standards, things like how we calculate height, how we define different uses, different standards for housing types or building types, and then how those look and feel and present to the street. So design guidelines are a tool that a lot of communities use to sort of manage and preserve community aesthetics and community character, but it's sort of how communities choose to do that where some of the flexibility comes into play.
If I could add one item or one quick thing. We heard overwhelmingly from a lot of folks who we talked to that Estes has a really special type of architecture. It's not Breckenridge. It's not all log cabins and clean roof lines. There's a uniqueness of how this community's developed, and there's an appreciation for that with the community. So our intent in doing this is not to create some uniform standard that everyone has to follow to create a look and feel. It's to control some of these X factors that may come in, as Philip mentioned, as outside entities come in and want to develop, which is why we've chosen to focus these really around commercial development and multifamily development.
So the question to the trustees this evening is whether or not you support requiring design guidelines for commercial buildings and multifamily buildings, again, to make sure that there's high quality design that reinforces community character, but also allows for the kind of flexibility that your individual property owners or business owners want to and ought to enjoy in terms of how they present their business or their property to the community.
I cannot find the red dump button to respond to the red flags I hear when you mention the word aesthetics and design control. I am alarmed when people raise that issue where the community or someone wants to control the decision-making of a property owner or a business owner. I think especially in the downtown district or in this community as a whole, there is an advantage that we have of a mismatched group of eras and designs, and we have independent property owners that make those decisions. And there's some bad-looking buildings, and there's some really cute buildings. And there has been a little bit of conversation over the last 10 years, sometimes on the town board, sometimes in the community, of how valuable it would be to have retail down below and apartments up above. And that mixed use is a design standard that is appealing to some and unaffordable and undesirable by others. And if you would like to control the design, I say you buy the property and you make those decisions. But for a community to tell any segment of the community how they should design, I would be alarmed at that conversation and would rally against that. So I think as part of a code, that would be short-sighted. Now, I'm working on a project on my piece of property that I own downtown to be business below and to be apartments above, because I recognize the need as a property owner and part of the community, that that's a need that we have as a community. So if I'm able to do that financially and philosophically, I want to be part of a solution that I think would benefit the community. But I would disagree with a code telling me how to build. That's my very candid response to your question.
Well, I think we already have things in place that you have to have a certain type of design, or you can't do something. Am I wrong on that? Don't we already have something in our code, be it general, not that specific, but I always thought we had a guideline to design. Just the height.
Yeah, there's not a architectural character guideline
Okay.
in whatsoever. I mean, you can see that in new buildings like the Dollar General, the O'Reilly Auto Parts. We don't have design guidelines. We have structure requirements, height and density, those types of things, but not architectural standards.
Okay.
Director Crecchio will probably have a much more technical planning answer for you.
Mayor, trustees, just to clarify what the town administrator said, we lack architectural design guidelines. We lack design guidelines. And I think where we're coming from is not, we would not tell you how to design your building inside, how you configure your rooms. I think what we're looking for direction is in terms of, I like to use this as a design guideline, screening. We lack clear standards on screening of rooftop equipment, ground-mounted equipment, dumpsters, compactors. Would you like to see no requirements on that, or would you like staff to consider design guidelines? Your rooftop equipment should be screened from street view. So it can be something as small as that, screening. We're not talking, like Trustee Eigel said, we would not tell him how to design his new building.
Okay.
But if he put a dumpster outside, should that be screened or not? So I think that's kind of what we're asking.
And that's kind of what I was thinking. I didn't think you were going to go clear to tell somebody how their building needs to look. So I would be in favor of, as long as it's down that line of yes, you need to have your trash cans, boxed in and things like that. I'm not sure how that looks, but if that's what you're talking about, I would not, I would be in favor of that, but not to describe how you're gonna design my house or my storefront.
Totally supportive of this. Yep. I think exactly how you phrased it is what is important here. Commercial, multifamily developments without prescribing a specific architectural style. We're not looking to say it has to be Tudor, it has to be modern, it has to be this way. We're talking about how do we continue to maintain our community integrity and unique character and all of that charm in a way that preserves it and preserves how, the look and feel of our community, as well as it accomplishing some of the other, design guidelines aren't just for the aesthetics piece of it too. They're for experience and the tourism, factor and resident safety and things like that. So, and what the wildlife mitigation that we talked about. So I think you're hearing a lot of we don't want too much government overreach. Well, the development code is innately government guidelines for how we're developing our community. And so I don't think I want to completely abandon any sort of, guidelines around it. In particular with this, I don't want to be too tight as has been said multiple times tonight, but I am really interested in what you might suggest for this and would like to see it come forward.
I think we just have to be careful with that slippery slope. I think screening is one thing, but all of a sudden it turns into you have to have a solid structure around your trash can, or a brick structure or something like that. I know in my business I have a dumpster. It's in my parking lot. It's bear proof. There's nothing around it, because by the time you get all this stuff out and try to get in the trash can and try to open the gate to it and open the container, it defies getting stuff into the trash can. I think you just have to be careful. I think that, I think there is such thing as government overreach. And I look at some of these communities, and when everything, and definitely design, no way. Because I look at some of these communities and they look like it was the same builder the entire community through. And Estes Park's not that. Estes Park's kind of hodgepodge. And that's part of the charm to it too. It's not a brick. It's not a veil that everything looks like it should be in Switzerland. You know, it is Estes Park. It was built hodgepodgey. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just have to be careful. I just think to have too much regulation on it, I can get the screening, I understand that. But then all of a sudden, what do you screen it with? Does it have to withstand 90-mile-an-hour winds? I mean, all of a sudden it becomes all these things that all of a sudden building becomes impossible. I mean, I don't want building to always be these large corporations or these large even developers. I want private people to be able to build their buildings. And you can't do that when there's so much expense to it. I mean, electrical code's gotten so expensive, and this code's gotten so expensive, and that code. I just think we have to be very, very careful of that, because I want the individuals to be able to build property and not big corporations.
I concur with Marie on this, and Steve, it was very helpful for your description of it, because I don't think we understood that until you started raising that. There are a couple of other things that are relevant. One is, you know, sometimes what we're really concerned about is the exterior appearance, and probably nothing more than that. But that may entail, you know, decisions about the type of building materials that are used too. You know, do we want to have a building made out of mirrors, you know, as an example, or, you know, some sort of completely metallic building? You know, there are things that might go beyond the screening issues that we may want to consider. And I understand too that we also have kind of a different development standard for the Stanley Hotel area, which has historic implications to it. I think there are maybe a few other areas where there might be historic, but the Stanley in particular does. And you know, the interesting thing is now that the state owns it, you know, are they going to even let us regulate it? You know, that's another issue that is a difficult one to face, I think, because we don't know exactly how they're going to view it, because, you know, municipalities are essentially a creature of state law in the first place. And so they can say whatever they want about the municipalities and make it effective to us. So I think we need to look at the Stanley Hotel complex to understand how that might differ. I understand that because of the way the development code has originated, there was a different method of measuring height there than under our development code, and I think that's been worked out from what I understand. But, you know, there are going to be some inconsistencies, particularly with the Stanley property we need to think about. And, you know, what can we really impose upon the state with that respect too? So, thank you.
I support something and looking here, I'd like to see what we come up with. I think it's a challenge, because I think one of the charm of Estes Park is the eclectic diversity. And how do you write guidelines? It's almost an oxymoron. Let's have guidelines that ensure diversity. That's tough. But I think it's there, and I think we already do it. I mean, there's a lot of support in this board for height limitations. That's design guidelines. If the Stanley came in and said, you know, I can save a whole lot of money if I put the carousel in a prefab Butler-built metal building, would we be arguing on this board saying, well, he's got that right to do it, it's downtown. If he wants to have a preform metal barn right in the middle of downtown, he should have the right to do that. I don't think I'd see many people arguing that way. So there are places where, you know, this is a community that's built around the aesthetics, the natural aesthetics and aesthetics of the community, even more so than most, because we are a destination community. And we have to have some concern and I think we need some bumpers on that. But how you do that and keep the diversity, I mean, even the comments we've heard about, I don't want it to look like Vail. Well, then you want design standards that don't look like Vail. You're talking about design standards. because you don't want it to look like that. So how do we do that? How do we have design standards so we don't look like Vail, we don't look like a Disneyland, we don't look like, you know, a prefab thing, or we have something that fits mountain architecture, yet still not trample on private property rights. That's why we're hiring you guys, because this is a tough one.
Yeah, my
But I
mind's
think-
already churning on how to kind of
Yeah, I
thread
think
that needle. So.
that eclectic mix downtown is what makes it the charm of Estes Park.
Yeah.
And how do we keep that, but not have someone come in and put in a steel Butler building because it's cheap and we can do it and get around. And I don't think anybody wants that downtown.
I find it interesting that eclectic, diversity, and hodgepodge mean the same thing tonight. Because, yeah, although I sometimes see the word eclectic as being a little more highfalutin, and Estes is definitely not highfalutin, so hodgepodge probably works better for me. I think what we're saying here is that there's a spectrum. We do want this, but we don't want to be way over there on the spectrum. We want to tread lightly. And I know there'll be points where we can guide that, and I think you've probably got what you need.
Yes, thank you. Another really fun downtown topic, signage, every planner's favorite conversation, probably every town attorney's favorite conversation. Signage, when done well, can be character defining for a neighborhood, and when done poorly, can be really upsetting. And it's essential to every successful business district is to have adequate signage allowances for your businesses. The comprehensive plan was very clear about a desire to strike that right balance for this community. Some of the code updates that in our conversations with staff and Visit Estes Park and the Chamber of Commerce and other stakeholders that have sort of led us towards includes integrating the sign code into the development code. It's presently a standalone section. And so having that integration is going to make staff's job easier, except for when it doesn't. And updating standards for neon, LED, and other illuminated signage. There's been significant changes in technology around lighting in the last 10 to 15 years. You've probably noticed that sometimes driving at night. It can be really bright, and it can be distracting and actually be a public nuisance and a hazard. So putting in better controls around some of those topics. Supporting dark sky principles by minimizing light pollution. This has been an interesting conversation for Eric and I to have throughout the community. There is a group of people in town who are interested in a formal dark sky designation because there's some statistics that support that being a great driver for tourist and gateway communities like yours. And it is also, to the conversation we've been having on and off about regulatory overreach, it is a strict set of regulations. So we think that the feedback, based on the feedback we've been hearing, is integrating principles without formally adopting the full dark sky program could potentially be a good way to sort of, again, strike that right balance. Provide greater flexibility for both the government and public signage, making sure that people who visit your community can get from point A to point B efficiently, and also in a way that sort of doesn't run afoul of the larger community aesthetic, or create a situation where there's too much signage, too much information. That's another balance to sort of strike here. And then standards around pole signs, and that gets to some of the discussion we've had around corporate architecture and how that relates to the look and feel of neighborhoods, as well as some of the entry points to the community. So big picture question, do you support integrating the sign code into the development code? And then are there any specific sort of signage outcomes that are particularly triggering for you or that you really like and want to see supported more broadly in the community?
For the town staff, why are they separate now? And so why are they separate? And what's the difference of making changes or dealing with the sign code as a standalone versus as part of the development code?
I'm not sure why they're separate. They've always been separate, I think, since I've been with the town. The difference in making, and we'll talk about this in this town board meeting tonight, the difference between making standalone changes, like we'll be discussing about with the wind signs tonight, and with a broader overarching approach is you may have some interaction between those regulatory elements where you don't necessarily want to allow maybe two types of different signs on a property, and if you're looking at it in kind of chunks, you may miss some of that. I think it's something that we can integrate a small portion, like if we're just talking about wind signs, we can integrate that discussion and those decisions if we decide to move forward with amendments into the broader code amendment process. But I definitely don't think we would want to chunk it out and do that individually for a bunch of different sign regulations. So I don't know if Attorney Kramer has more background on why they're separate or not.
I don't know. We can look into that. I don't know if there was a good reason or if that's just how it developed. The one thing that comes to mind that would make a substantive difference in terms of moving it over is that the enforcement provisions of the municipal code are very different from the enforcement provisions of the development code. And that seems to be historically because we've embedded more leeway in the development code. If a property owner doesn't have their property in compliance with the development code, you give them an opportunity to fix it. You give them a notice of violation. Only after that process is complete would you take any sort of enforcement action that would have any teeth. Whereas the municipal code, you can get a ticket right away. So we'd need to talk through what we would really want in that respect. But on the other hand, reconsidering the development code as a whole, we might reconsider those enforcement provisions as well. So it could be part of that broader conversation too.
I don't have any reservations about integrating them. My experience working in signs for 20-something years was that the code developed, I just wonder if there's a legal reason, but the development of the sign code independently there was not much definition or regulation in any other code, so they created a sign code. And that sign code evolved over the years or decades to be specific to the changing needs of signs in the business community. So I wouldn't have any reservation about integrating them and then working on if there were issues with enforcing it.
Yeah, I think integrating is probably a good idea. I don't know if we have it, but I think it would help eliminating the chances of having conflicting things in the development code that someone would pop up, it conflicts with the sign code, and which one do we follow and where does it go? And I don't know how they tie together, but there are many different ways. If we have them and they're integrated, that's a good idea. And I don't think we should support or should push towards like dark sky certification. We're not going to be that way. I mean, you could turn every light off in Estes Park and there's this huge glow from the Front Range. I've been to dark sky places where it really is dark skies. I think we should limit and control some of the lighting and downlighting and things like that. But I think it's a disservice to people who come here to say we're a dark skies community when we never will be. And I think it's foolish for us to pretend we will be unless Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, Greeley all turn off their lights. We're not going to be like it is out in the middle of the Green River or on the Grand Canyon.
I support integrating together as well, although I want to make sure we still have a separate sign code because, you know, it's not all happening in a development context at all. There's a lot of temporary signs up and things like that. So I don't think you were suggesting that, but just to be clear.
Yes.
All right. And then again, well, I think we had an opportunity to discuss if there were specific points to be made. Non-conforming uses, I will advocate for the town staff for a moment and suggest that if there's one thing we can fix, this might be it. We've gotten a lot of really helpful feedback from the staff around the issue of non-conforming uses in the community. So big picture, non-conforming uses are where you have a land use that doesn't comply with underlying zoning in one way, shape, or form. Either it doesn't match the lot size, it doesn't match the type of uses that are allowed in the zone district, and this is common in communities that have grown organically over time. Some of the excuse me, some of the solutions that we're looking at with respect to non-conforming uses include revising the lot standards to streamline the review of a potential development on a non-conforming lot. This stuff gets very technical very fast, and I'm happy to sort of go into detail to support your specific lines of inquiry. I think it's enough to just say that there are buildings that don't match underlying zoning, and sometimes people want to do things with that, and we want to make it easier for them to do that with certain controls. And then amending existing zone districts to allow for greater variation on sort of site-specific conditions. And again, I can go into more detail about what that means to sort of support your discussion around this topic. But the sort of big picture question before the board to support our code writing efforts is, do you support allowing small site-specific improvements on non-conforming lots to happen on a by right basis if they meet certain standards? And we can talk about site-specific, we can talk about by right, and we can talk about criteria, however you'd like to.
Yes, and I don't want us to be a community-wide HOA. You hear all those complaints about HOAs doing this, and I don't think that's who we want to be.
Definitely, yes. You mentioned I think in the report that 60% of our lots are non-conforming. I mean, that's almost ridiculous. And I know in my neighborhood, there's supposed to be 1 acre lots. Every lot is 0.98 acres. So anything anybody does in my neighborhood would be a non-conforming and have to go through the process.
You tracked down that surveyor who did the subdivision plat on that.
And the planners that allowed it to happen. It's crazy. But if you're 0.98 acres, you ought to be able to just do minor developments without going through this. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Oh my gosh, are we going to get to number 8?
I misspoke.
Oh.
I misspoke. There was actually 9 topics.
I wish I sandbagging them. So parking is another sort of common community conversation. The comprehensive plan goal, encourage a balanced mix of uses that meets diverse needs of residents, business, and visitors. And a sort of sub-goal of that sub-policy statement is minimize the visual impacts of large parking lots by requiring new development and redevelopment. I think those are sort of key operative terms to locate parking at the rear or the side of buildings. This gets to, I think, several overlapping areas of community interest, right? Everything from traffic and access management from our transportation network, from our road network, to community character issues around how buildings face the street or not, right? Do they present to the street, or are you looking at the parking lot first? There's issues related to parking lots and lighting, to the extent that a parking lot has to be lit. Where is that lighting happening, and how does that sort of affect neighboring properties? So getting this right can be a great tool towards responding to a number of different interests that are articulated in the comprehensive plan. Some of the potential responses that we are exploring with stakeholders and with staff are amending residential parking standards to reflect actual parking demand based on certain, based on the type of development, and then sort of transportation planner math around how much parking demand that's actually going to generate. Right-sizing parking to reduce impervious surfaces. This has tremendous environmental benefits, as well as decreasing the demand for stormwater services from your infrastructure, which can have significant public benefit as well. Aligning parking regulations and short-term rental rules to make sure that short-term rentals are mitigating their parking demand on site, as opposed to making that a sort of broader neighborhood issue. And then evaluate hard surface requirements to ensure that the hard surfacing we are requiring meets certain environmental and engineering standards. So in select areas of town, do you support allowing a fee in lieu option to reduce required on-site parking? This would complement some of the comprehensive plan policies and some of the solutions that we have to potentially deploy to those. And if yes, what areas of town do you think that fee in lieu of some or all of the parking would be appropriate?
And do you want to give a couple examples?
Examples
Of fee in lieu options?
Sure. So in different communities, let's say in a commercial or mixed-use zone district, there may be a 1 parking space per 500 square feet of commercial use requirement. That's kind of a standard metric, is there is based on the size of the development or the size of the use, you have to have a certain number of spaces. Well, transportation planners maybe can do some math and find out that that's not actually the parking demand that that particular use would generate. And so instead of requiring 5 spaces for a particular development, they would require 3, and then the additional 2 spaces could be mitigated with a fee in lieu. And that fee can go into a fund that communities use to pay for anything from transit to stormwater infrastructure to public parking facilities elsewhere. There's all kinds of ways that you can use that fee in lieu for community benefit.
And I suppose the larger a city or town is, the more you're going to be putting into that pot. You know, when we've talked about fees for development and stuff, we certainly don't have the very expansive things that are just pouring millions of dollars into that pot. It would probably take us a while to accumulate to do a lot with that, I would think, and unless I'm missing the mark on the scope of this. But I'll hold off on it and listen to folks.
I just have a question. How does that work out when a building's built for a certain function and then it sells and has a different function? And we've already taken out half the parking spaces that probably should have been in that building in the first place, but it's a different function.
Yeah.
And the neighbors have to deal with this issue at that point?
I think it was Trustee Brown that said an hour and a half ago, it depends. And that's very true here. That in some communities, if you change the use, if you have a change in use application, that triggers some level of compliance with the parking code. And then there's a fee in lieu off ramp. If you're not actually going to redevelop the property, then the new use has to pay a fee in lieu. There are other communities where once you build your building and you build your parking, that's the building and the parking and whatever the uses are that are turning over in that building over time, doesn't change the parking to building scenario that was originally developed. So those are kind of the two extremes.
Right, because how do you increase your parking? I mean, you only have so much room, so unless you buy the lot next door,
Right.
how do you increase parking? So
It would-
that, I don't really like this fee in lieu. But that's part of the reason, is because, there are places in town, especially business places, where there's not enough parking for that spot in the first place, and then if you change it even more, it'd be horrible.
Sure.
So anyway, I would not be for that.
I like the part when you said we're going to look at the building and determine what's the appropriate amount of parking for this building. Until you got to the part where you said we're going to charge you if we tell you you need to use the appropriate amount of parking. So it seems like it's a technical to charge a fee. And I do not like fees, and I know a lot of people who don't like fees. So a fee in lieu is where you lost me. Using the appropriate parking for a use seems like a great approach, and not just saying, and I think that's a movement in a lot of communities where they're looking at parking minimums and changing parking minimums, relaxing them. So it sounded like that until you said we're going to charge you if we do the appropriate parking. So I would not support a fee in lieu of appropriate parking.
So the mayor believes we're all going to be driving flying cars in the near future, I think.
And flying buses and
Flying
trains
buses,
too.
yeah. And, that there could well be, certainly autonomous vehicles are going to be a big deal. The change parking needs. I think they're going to happen, and how much they happen up here, who knows? I think there'll be more in urban centers, but I don't like fee in lieu either generally, although I kind of like the fee in lieu only on a change of use. I can buy that because that makes a lot of sense to me, but fee in lieu to allow a developer to change that, I just don't like that idea. So.
I'm kind of looking at the flip side of the coin of what Trustee Igo mentioned, is that I don't like the fee either, is that somebody who needs a certain number of parking spaces could basically pay the town and get out of it and put in less parking spaces than they need because they paid a fee. I think we need to put in the number of parking spaces you need for whatever is proposed. Now, it could change, we can't do crystal ball, but I think it should be, you put in the number of parking spaces that you need for the businesses they're putting in, and that it's not dedicated as a certain number, regardless of what's going to be done. But to have a fee one way or the other, I'm not real fond of that one either.
Yeah, I think it needs to be required for whatever that building, what they're going to be doing, to have that sufficient parking for that.
Yep.
Great, thank you. We touched on some of this. I do just want to kind of make sure that we run through everything. But the big picture question, do you support reducing parking requirements for affordable or workforce housing? There's a sort of park it like you mean it part of this conversation, making sure that the parking requirement actually aligns with parking demand for the development in question.
And if I could add one, just a note to this question. Part of my job is doing development pro formas. I do a lot of financial modeling for developments. Parking almost always is a net hit on a development. And when you're trying to price units at a certain level, that's almost always the encumbrance that we run up against, is how do we deal with this challenge of having to provide something? So what we're asking here is, if there were some type of a reduced parking requirement for affordable housing development that could help to achieve those pricing on those units, would you be in favor of requiring some other type of mitigation in the form of shared parking with adjacent parcels, bicycle parking, access to transportation networks, some other off-ramp to provide that access without it just being a spot?
Yes.
Yeah, I think yes, and I didn't speak up on the last one. I mean, I'd been in the minority anyway. I don't think what you guys were suggesting was that people could pay the town to get out of parking requirements. The idea was like, is there a flexibility based on what the use of the building or the area of community is? And I think we talk all the time about, if we're looking at like a big parking garage project, can we repurpose that if things change in our transit, experience in the next 15, 20 years? So it's, we argue that a lot, and it doesn't seem like it's totally applying here, but for this, I think absolutely. And the more we can get our interconnected trail system as we're going through all of those goals, this would feed right into that. So absolutely supportive.
Yes, supportive.
Isn't there a trend in other communities? I think I've read about other ones that are cutting back or even eliminating parking requirements for developments. I think Denver's been looking at it. Some of the other ones.
Yes.
Denver just passed it 3 days ago.
That's what I thought.
They removed it completely.
What did they remove it completely?
They removed parking minimums.
When I was the community development director for the city of Aspen, we removed minimums from our commercial zones, and then a few years later, we cut in half the amount of required parking for a multifamily residential development.
That's good. And what was the result? I mean, has it been long enough to know what happened with that?
Not in any meaningful way, no.
Okay.
But that's a whole other conversation about development in Aspen.
Well, you had 3 that said yes, so I'll make it 4 and we can move on.
Great.
All right, this is our last topic for the evening, mixed-use zoning. So the comprehensive plan has some clear direction around trying to create opportunities to mix certain uses that are compatible with one another. In doing so, also trying to create circumstances where the provision of workforce housing can happen, and look for opportunities to kind of integrate other community uses with as secondary uses to things like residential development. So we're looking at a couple options around mixed-use zoning, and I think one of the challenges that we've heard is that the zone doesn't exist today, so oftentimes a mix of uses results in a PUD. We are interested in exploring the potential to create a mixed-use zone district in select portions of the town, while also amending PUD regulations to allow for mixed-use development. I will note that what is in the mixed-use zone, where the mixed-use zone is all to be determined. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but we are interested in exploring this as an option to deal with some types of development that are starting to emerge, not necessarily in your community, but in others. Just going back to what I mentioned earlier about the financial modeling, oftentimes a developer will look at a first floor commercial space as a way to subsidize residential space above. So it can be a helpful tool to create that kind of affordable housing pathway within the community in select cases. So would be curious for this group if there's support for exploring a mixed-use zoning district within Estes Park, and if so, what do you think that district should look like from a use standpoint?
Yes, and I don't know.
This feels like it might be one of the, an application that the overlays that you mentioned several items ago may be applicable. This may be an opportunity, but then it would be like an incentive to create a development that we need in the community. But I can't see you saying, well, this zone is mixed use and they're all gonna kind of look like that, because then we get into that whole idea of retail and we look like somebody. So it feels like it's a design kind of a thing, but I don't know enough about it. So I would be interested, but I wouldn't say go for it.
I think that this is where a lot of communities are going, to the mixed use. I too, not sure exactly, besides the retail down below and housing above, what all that could look like. But to me, mixed use is interesting to, instead of everything so segregated. You know, it used to be you would drive down to the mall area and that's where you did your shopping, but now that's incorporated in where you live and you shop at the same area. I think that's a new concept that has been gaining momentum in the US. And to me, that's interesting and I like that. So I would be in favor of looking at that further.
I favor it for sure. It has to be kind of limited though in areas for sure. And I think we have kind of some natural areas, our highway corridor areas are appropriate for that. I did want to tell a story of what it can mean to a community. So I have a daughter that lives in Minneapolis area, and Minneapolis is very interesting because it's been this way for a long time too, where you'll have these residential areas where there'll be a corner that is commercial, usually a coffee shop. They're all small scale stuff. And it creates a sense of community in a way that the residential area alone doesn't do. And so I think it has some real advantages for the sense of community too. I don't know that we do it that way here, but it does have those sorts of advantages as well as the financial aspect you mentioned.
I'd go with this, although, again, like folks have said, there's a lot of lack of clarity. I think when I did the little survey, I said horizontal, not vertical, and I know I said that. And although vertical within the limits that we want to allow, well, okay. So what will it end up being? This is something that should develop as the code develops.
Thank you. Thank you. Trustee Brown, to your point, it's funny, when we brought this up to the community, the thing that kept coming up was a grocery store, small scale market in neighborhoods to avoid having to go to the market over here. I've heard they've run out of stuff before, so. Well, thank you all. Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor. Oh, I want to just thank you for your time. I know this was a lot to get through and sincerely appreciate your thoughtful commentary and your input. We've got a lot of work still ahead of us, so we are going to, as I mentioned earlier, be out in the community in August and September, doing pop-up events, doing open houses. Please tell your friends, tell your loved ones to pay us a visit. Direct folks to the survey if you can. We'll be reconvening with the Community Conversations Group after their deliberations this fall, and really start our work then into organizing some of these code recommendations. It sounds like from tonight there's going to be a lot that we are going to want and need your input on, so I would fully expect you to see us multiple times over the next several months, really around certain topics to get into the how far should we go or shouldn't we go on these things. So fully expect to see me again over the next several months. But thank you again for your time, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much. Great work. Yeah, the pop-up events, I keep thinking flash mobs or something. Okay, we'll talk about future study session topics.
Two tonight, Mayor. Visitor Center parking lot design, that's engineer Trevor Whitwer for November 11th. And then policy 601, spending authority and limits edits, Director Zimmerman for September 23rd.
Okay, good. Anything from any trustees?
Mayor, we have a couple of times the issue of e-bikes, scooters, electronic, all these things, and every day that I go outside and I see one go by at 30, I think we're talking about it, we're not doing anything with it. I think that it warrants some conversation about regulation. A lot of communities have undertaken this. We have not. It's challenging for the safety of the people on the e-devices, bikes, vehicles, and for the motorists. And I think that we have a responsibility to advocate for the safety of both vehicle drivers and.
Going to bring that same topic up, but
Oh.
I had discussions with Travis, Town Administrator Mahalik, and he provided to me, and I've asked him to provide to all the trustees the current regulations. Maybe you've read them also.
I will take a look.
And so I first want to share those with everybody. And I know that he also is having discussions with Chief Stewart about a strategy about better enforcement of
Great.
those existing.
Great.
So that may not get us where we need to yet, but.
Let's start
correct.
there. Yep, I'll dig
Yeah.
into it and meet with both of you if that works.
Right.
So I would
So
relax my request.
we'll share
yeah.
that with all the trustees, that link to the current regulations, and then more to come on it, because I agree.
Sounds good.
We
Okay.
definitely
Thanks.
have to temp this, yeah. With that, this session is adjourned. The regular board meeting will start right at 7 sharp.